Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with another update to the Quebec provincial election series. So, just at the top, let's see what has happened since last week. So, those of you who follow my channel frequently and have good memories will be aware that I said I was going to slightly tweak my handling of some of the raw data around like the different regions of Quebec, because I wasn't terribly enthused with it. And with the data I have available, I think I have improved the results, though there is some inklings of I'm not really certain. Like, I've heard some suggestions that this region here, which federally the Conservatives dominate, is actually doing a lot better for the provincial Conservatives than my model's currently suggesting, but I just don't have much data to calibrate that against, so I can't really do much with it. So if those reports are correct, I might be missing a lot here. I know 338 has Boyce, North and South as quite competitive, and maybe that is true. I'm not really sure what data he's actually using to get that. I'm not doubting him or doubting his model, but I don't have data to do any forecast like that. I also know that Too Close to Call is has done some things forecasting with federal support in this area, correlating to the provincial stuff, and again, that could be a correct thing to do. We'll see when the results come in, if that was the right methodology, and if so, that's on my end. Bad on me. Maybe I should have adopted that. But right now, with the data I have available and the data I can see, I'm not so certain. I don't really like tinkering too much with the nuts and bolts on regionals like that. Because how my model works, I know how my model works. Those two have different models. So we'll see. I could be taking a big L on this one by not doing too much. I've done a bit of tweaking, but not too much here. Where my big changes, sort of, in approach have been is Montreal and Laval, largely because I'm changing how I'm using the Main Street data. Main Street has forecast Montreal and the suburbs as two separate categories. Before I was kind of merging them together. Now I'm separating them and not really separating them. I'm now treating that differently and doing some math stuff there. It's a bit complicated and nuts and boltsy, but the gist of it is basically it is reduced the CAQ in Montreal and Laval, and it has slightly increased Liberal vote share. Technically, it hasn't, but if I didn't do this, their vote share would be even lower. And it has increased the Quebec Solidaire vote share in Montreal, because they do better in Montreal than they do in the suburbs. So the way I'm now handling it has changed things. So in this case, it's not so much I think I'm changing my model here. I think I was handling the data wrong before. So we'll see this here. So again, this is not strictly a result of my changes. This is also polling trends, because trending in the polls, Quebec Solidaire is doing better. Liberals are doing worse. But between the polls of last week and my changes, we're really seeing Montreal specifically, though the whole province is affected, but it's mostly Montreal, is Quebec Solidaire is up about 3.4, the CAQ's down about 2.2, the Liberals are down about 1.6, Parti Québécois up about 0.8, and all the other parties are down about 0.4, so the Canadian Party of Montreal or whatever, there's a couple of them. So there's that. the rest of the province, the last week has, since the last debate, the last debate we don't really have any data yet, but since the first debate, what we're kind of seeing here is the Parti Québécois gained a bunch of ground, a little tiny bit in Montreal and the rest of Quebec, but quite a bit in Quebec City itself. Not likely going to be affecting anything. They're mostly drawing support from the CAQ, so I guess in that regard, it might affect something at some point. As the CAQ goes weak enough in Quebec, potentially, if we go here so we can see, maybe Taschereau or some of these other downtown ridings might flip. and if enough support in the suburbs goes down, maybe some of these will flip to the Conservatives. Potentially. Unlikely, but potentially. The other thing worth noting is with the polling trends, Ledger's showing that the Liberals are down a little bit, and the Quebec Solidars up a little bit. Main Street is showing Quebec Solidars gaining a bunch of ground, and the Liberals are losing a bunch of ground. And this isn't... So, basically here, it looks like if trends continue, Montreal could see some of these Liberal ridings potentially flip to the Quebec Solidar. It's not looking super likely right now, but potentially it is plausible. And it looks like it is plausible that some of these CAQ ridings could be flipped to the Quebec Solidar. Big if, trends continue into this last week of the campaign, and we see Quebec Solidar get around 20-21-ish range in Montreal, and the Liberals get 29-ish, and the CAQ around 25-ish, which is what the current trend would suggest, then we might see up to 8 seats in Montreal go to Quebec Solidar. Though that still would leave the Liberals technically as the official opposition, though it's possible. Or not necessarily, it's not guaranteed. Though it's going to be difficult to loot for some of these seats to be lost, especially if the CAQ is also losing ground in Montreal. Now, Quebec Solidar still has a couple other ridings like Taschereau and Quebec City. This guy over here, I can't name him, and Sherbrooke are all in play's the wrong word, but this is a big but. If they get their 2018 performance, those are in play or are potentials. So now, there is a bit of a caveat on Quebec Solidar's numbers, as I think my model might be underestimating them. Now, why is that? Well, the way I handle polling error really does require... First off, there's two reasons, but the first one is the polling error. How I handle polling error really requires a nice broad cross-section of polls, and yes, in the last week we've had Ledger polls, we've had a Sigma poll, we've had a ResearchGo poll, and we've had, obviously, Main Street polls. But Main Street polls are still overwhelmingly dominating the average, so it is skewing things, how my model handles polls, which, again, some people do differently, but I don't, because I like how I handle this in my model. I think it does really well for historically. It's just in this particular election, we're just not getting a lot of polls, so maybe I should have changed it, but it's a bit late now. I'm not going to do that. So at this point, Main Street, since they have such a high polling frequency, we're not having a lot of other polls, it is skewing stuff, for sure. Hopefully, we'll see some other polls from maybe Abacus or maybe even like Ecos or forum or campaign or something as well, throwing into this Angus Reid maybe. Those would all be good. More ledger polls and such will also be more than welcome. We're guaranteed to get more Main Street polls. They're polling every single day. And don't get me wrong, Main Street, I really appreciate that. It's just other pollsters have to catch up some slack. You guys can't be the only ones polling. So there is that. So Main Street is biased or Main Street is off. That's really going to affect my overall model because I have a lot of data coming only from them. Not much I can do about that. The other thing, though, is in Canada, for some reason that I don't think anyone has an explanation for, telephone polls and online polls have very different skews, and it's across pollsters. Every telephone pollster and every online pollster have these skews. Online panels seem to skew left. In other words, the NDP, Quebec Solidaire do better in online polls than telephone polls. And Conservatives tend to do better in telephone polls. And also, interestingly enough, the Green Party tends to do better in telephone polls. In that regard, actually, the telephone polls or online polls are really good at estimating the Green Party. Telephone polls are actually pretty bad at estimating the Green Party. And I don't think there's anything intrinsically wrong, methodologically speaking, here. I think it's just a matter that they're getting different people. If I were to start conducting polls, I would probably do 50-50 online, panel, telephone. Because in my mind, based on my experience and what I'm seeing here, it looks like online has one skew and the opposite skew happens in telephone. And if you average those out, you have very little, you get rid of most of the skew inherent to either methodology. But what we're seeing right now with the Quebec forecast and how my model works is we're overwhelmingly dominated by telephone polls, and we only have a couple online. We have 2 Ledger and 1 Research Co. And I think Segma might be online, but I don't have the PDF for Segma. I got the PDF for the most recent Ledger one today. So if you have the PDF for the most recent Segma poll, please send it my way. That'd be really appreciated. So that is causing uncertainty in the results. Though as we get more and more polls from more and more pollsters, that will weigh out, and hopefully in the last week we will see a bunch come in. Everyone will want to have their say, hopefully. So, depending on how this goes, we might see a lot of movement in this last week. And depending on how much movement we see, I may or may not do a midweek update, but probably not. Don't expect that. Especially if I don't have power. We'll see how long I have. If I have power, then follow me on Twitter, I guess, if you want to find out if the video is coming out on Tuesday. We'll see if I have power to actually get that done. My aim for this week is Alberta leadership update on Tuesday and Canada update on Thursday. If I have power. I'm about to get it by big storm in Nova Scotia here. So, what's the story with this race, right? Well, for the beginning of the race, for the first 2-3 weeks, it was about the growth of the Conservatives. So, they're not really on a map. So, the growth of the Conservatives here. But if you look here, they started around 13 and a bit. So what we see here, right, where the start of my model, the Conservatives are down around 13 and a bit, and last election, obviously, around 1. And as time has progressed, they have slowly moved up to about 18, minus some weeks here where I actually literally had error on my part where they were in the 20s. But they moved around 18. But Ledger, Research Co., Main Street seem to be sort of plateauing them. The last couple weeks in Main Street, or last week or so in Main Street, the Conservatives have really been hovering between 18 and 20. Research Co had them at 18, and Ledger has them at 16, both slightly up from the week before, which was at 15. So it looks like the Conservatives might have plateaued here. So the beginning of the race, where this was the big interesting thing, might be no more. That's no longer driving what the race is. And that said, though, it isn't that bad for the Conservatives, because even if they have plateaued right now around the mid-18s, I'll just move this off the side for a second, with only 2 ridings, though I will note Pontiac is just barely theirs, with just 2 ridings to name, that isn't a bad result, because Quebec does give money based off of how many votes a party gets. So if they're talking in the realm of getting 18% of the vote, that is a huge influx of cash for the party. And once people can see, objectively speaking, where the Conservatives have a lot of support, I think you will see a lot of the remaining Quebec Liberal supporters and other people who don't like the CAQ rally to the Conservatives in those ridings. Right now, we're a bit in the Wild West, where we don't actually really know where the Conservatives are strongest. We know they have about 18, but where? Where is their 18? Hard to say. We do know for certain that it is in Francophone areas primarily, and primarily in Quebec City, or Francophone areas, yes, but so overlaps heavily with the Federal Conservative Party. We don't know it specifically. So there is some leeway there, and I think it is actually good for the party going forward. Like, this is going to be a good result for them, and I think it will really help the party. And as long as they pull out 1 or 2 seats here, I think the Quebec Conservatives will be a real force in 2026. They might even pull out some more seats as fatigue for Legault starts setting in after he's been in power for 8 years. But the big one here, the big story here, is kind of a double story. I kind of alluded at the beginning of the election. It's the Liberals and Quebec Solidaire. The Liberals are really dire straits. They were doing mediocre 17, 18 range before the first debate. Following the first debate, they're now around 14 to 16, depending on the particular poll. That is disastrous numbers for them. It's very likely, again, I will bring this back over here, that the Quebec Liberals are going to be wiped out of everywhere that isn't Montreal here. And they're down to single-digit support in Quebec City. And they might go down to single-digit support outside of Montreal overall. That would be devastating. That would be destroying the party. And because, again, where the Quebec Conservatives are benefiting from the per-vote subsidy, the Quebec Liberals are about to lose about 40% of their base. So that's going to be a huge blow to their finances. Similarly, the Parti Québécois is going to experience that, but the Parti Québécois is actually kind of resurging itself. So even if they have a bad result, at least they can pat themselves on the back that it wasn't the worst result. It's a consolation prize, I guess. Ledger does actually have the Parti Québécois doing relatively good, but again, not enough polls. Main Street has them doing poorly, so it is what it is. The big story, though, is Quebec Solidaire. And I touched on this earlier. They have potential to gain a lot of ground. It's very possible, if the Liberals keep losing ground, Quebec Solidaire might, I don't think it's likely, they might become official opposition. And if that happens, I don't think it's very likely right now, but if that does happen and Quebec Solidaire becomes the official opposition the Liberals are dead. There might be a vestigial Liberal Party that persists for several election cycles in Western Montreal among the Anglo population. But if they lose official opposition status, there's not going to be a revival. We've seen this in how many provinces now? We're at 5 with Ontario. The Liberals lose official opposition status. They have a very hard time of coming back. Especially in the day of the internet, where you're talking about more genuine, more authentic parties. The Conservatives in Quebec Solidaire. It's hard for them to come back, especially in Quebec, too, because the Quebec Liberals were originally based off of big tent federalism versus big tent separatism of Parti Québécois. It's not surprising that both parties are suffering right now, because the dynamic is changing. Quebec is seeing a new party system form. The Quebec Liberal Parti Québécois party system is dying, and I think we're now seeing a triopoly form. I said this last week, but I'm actually amending my triopoly. I think it's going to be Quebec Solidaire, the Conservatives, and the CAQ. The Liberals, I think, are barring, though from what I can tell, the last debate performance, no one thought Anglais did good, so. But barring a unicorn, like a miraculous election result on the 3rd, or revival in the polls, the Liberals might be toast. And I know Too Close to Call is starting to forecast Quebec Solidaire around 12 seats. I personally think that's aggressive, but I can see how it's happening. Because this guy here, I can't think of it, Sherbrooke over here, 2 of the downtown Quebec City seats, and 3 more in Montreal itself were all possible for Quebec Solidaire if Quebec Solidaire gains close to about 16% of the vote, which they look like they are trending to. This is really important. They are trending in that direction. If they get there, 12 seats isn't impossible. I don't think it's likely, but it's not impossible. Now, I don't think the Liberals are really going to do much worse than 14 at this point. We see here that this one's margin of error, CAQ leading, margin of error, CAQ leading, margin of error, Liberals leading. This one they could lose relatively easily. And the rest of these I don't really think are that possible, like maybe this guy. But going below 13 will be quite hard for the Liberals in this particular election, because they've lost everything else. They only have Montreal. And they pretty much only have the ridings in Montreal that have a large Anglo population. The Quebec Liberals are almost, literally, dead. I started the election saying the Liberals are staring into the void. And I stand by that. They are staring into the void. They're on the precipice, and they're looking into this black hole that is every other party that has burned out of existence. They're kind of a paper tiger right now. They have a lot of seats, they have a lot of vote share, but their vote is extremely inefficient. They're losing support everywhere. They have an unpopular leader that their base doesn't even particularly like. And they have insurgent new parties with charismatic leaders who have very genuine, sincere platforms that are actually tackling issues head-on, that the Liberals are just kind of waffling about. You might disagree with the Conservatives. You might disagree with the Quebec Solidaire. You might even disagree with the CAQ or whatever. But all three of those parties are genuinely attacking issues from the front and have a clear worldview and a clear path. The Liberals are kind of murky, especially under Anglade's leadership, which was anything but stellar. It's not clear at all what the Liberals want to be. They kind of moved to the left, they kind of moved back to the center, they kind of moved pro-sovereigntist, but kind of moved back to federalist. They're kind of waffling about, they don't know what they want to be. The senior leadership of the party doesn't know what it wants to do. Anglade doesn't know what to be. The party has no identity. Its identity for the last 30 years was we're not the Parti Québécois, but with the Parti Québécois being eclipsed by CAQ, as people in Quebec are giving up on referendums for now, there's no place left for the Liberals. They have no niche. And it's kind of the thing federally. And this is an inevitability in first past the post. Yes, you will occasionally get elections like this where one party runs away with the cake because there is a party realignment going on. And you can wax poetically about how bad that is or unfair that is. And I don't think you're entirely wrong. But the big thing is, in this particular election, I don't think it actually matters, because even in a proportional system, the Parti Québécois CAQ coalition is guaranteed and would have an easy majority. But secondly, this does put an incentive on parties to actually try. It's just a matter of voters having the right intelligence. Intelligence is the wrong word, education. The problem in a lot of places in Canada and other places first past the post is civics classes, and voter education is really bad. People don't understand what's going on in the system, how the system works, and are heavily encouraged by parties to anti-vote. Not to vote conscience. And I will not say there's no time to anti-vote, but voting your conscience is always important. It always does something. It's just a matter of, will it happen this election? If you genuinely believe in what the Conservatives or Quebec Solidaire are doing, you should vote for them. Always. Because, especially in places of Quebec, every vote can get more money. And second, you tell other people that you agree with this. Other people see that this party is gaining ground, that it's gaining credibility, that it's gaining value. Yes, you can do this in other systems. I'm not saying you can't, but I'm saying it is often said misrepresentation of the system that does this. First past post, that is. You do get elections like this. Yeah. But this is what happens in a realignment. Canada as a whole has actually been going through realignment the last 40 years, since the NDP started existing. The question federally is basically, should the Liberals or the NDP reign? Right now, provincially, the NDP is killing all the Liberal parties, or in the case of Quebec, Quebec Solidaire. And federally, well, I guess provincially in Quebec, it's actually the Conservatives and Quebec Solidaire, but I digress. Federally, it looks like it might be the Liberals killing the NDP off, though we might end up in a situation where we have a federal Liberal Party and no provincial Liberal parties. So that'll be something. So, what does all this mean? Just to summarize here. What's the story of this election? Well, 2018 was the start of a realignment. The CAQ came in and initiated it. They burst onto the scene. Technically, they started in 2012. I know. But the CHU taking government in 2018 forced a realignment to start. So we are at the start of the realignment in 2018. At this point, between the pandemic, the reaction to the pandemic, and the story of politics in Quebec, in Canada, the internet, we are at the apex of this realignment. I think we see the three parties that are going to go out of here, and the question going forward is their relative strengths. It's likely, as long as French is the language predominantly speaking in Quebec, that some form of sovereigntist party like CAQ will likely be the default party. But that's not guaranteed. And that's the interesting of this election. Not just who will become the dominant party in Quebec, which parties will survive, not likely the Quebec Parti Québécois, the Liberals, but what relative strengths? That's the interesting question here. And I think a lot of people covering this election are kind of missing that. Well, with that, I bid you all adieu, and I will hopefully see you on Tuesday with a Alberta leadership update. But if I have no power, there won't be. I'll let you know on Twitter there. Otherwise, if you liked the video, by all means, press like, share, subscribe. Let everyone know. Spread out the word. It helps the channel quite a bit. And comment below what you think. If you think I'm right, if you think I'm off base, if you think I'm stupid, if you think I've made a mistake somewhere. Again, I can't actually point to an example of it because I don't ever take screenshots or remember this stuff or write it down. But there has been several cases of people pointing out. In the US series, notably, it's like the most recent one, I think it was Jared Walsh, actually. If you're watching this, kudos to you. You might be the first one I remember the name of when I'm doing an update on this. But he pointed out, I didn't update Alaska to consider the special election results. It's probably not super safe because there's now a Democrat incumbent and the voting system doesn't favor the Republicans there-ish. So you're right there. So I do make mistakes. And what would I be if I didn't try to correct them? I'm trying to be correct here. I'm trying to be the most accurate. You can't be the most accurate if you don't correct them. So by all means, let me know if you think I'm being dumb or making a mistake. I welcome all the criticism because that's the internet. Otherwise, though, I hope you all have a wonderful day. And again, I will see you Tuesday. Hopefully.